Hello and welcome to the Startups of London podcast. I'm your host Ozan and the founder of Startups of London. Today I'm joined by Steve Coulson, founder and CEO of Kitt. Kitt is a full-service platform that finds, designs and fits out, manages and sees through the office space for companies. I'm very curious to understand more about it. Welcome, Steve.
Yeah, look, thanks so much for being here. Pleasure.
So let's start with what Kitt is. I do have a few interesting questions that I curiously want to get into, but I would like to get an understanding of what Kitt is, what the basic business model and the value proposition is, and get everyone on the same page before we dive into those.
Yeah, sure. So look, we set Kitt up to solve a problem that we had when we were scaling a business previously, which is if you're a team of 50 to maybe 500 people, you're left with two really bad choices. Choice number one is go to a co-working space and it's all very easy, but it's very cookie cutter and it can feel a bit bland and inappropriate for the stage that you're at. Or go to a traditional lease and you pick up 111 different suppliers, we added it up, that you have to engage with, pay and manage and all the rest of it over the course of your 3 or 4 years there. So we just felt, look, we want to create a product for teams of that size where you can find the space that's right for you. You can design it with an interior designer, and then absolutely everything about the management is done through an app, and the price is all inclusive. So we said if we can aggregate the market and deliver that experience anywhere, then we would have had a product that we would have bought to ultimately enable companies to have space that empowers them to thrive.
Just one thing I would like to understand better. Is this a temporary solution for companies, or is it kind of like a more permanent solution? What's the time frame there?
Sure. So we are typically working with companies for an initial period of 2 or 3 years. So it's very much a permanent headquarters.
Mm-hmm.
And the model that we've adopted is asset light, to be clear. So we don't take on the lease ourselves. It's the lease is taken on between the landlord and the tenant. And we are just wrapping up the whole remaining part of the experience into a single package to make it as easy as a serviced office whilst getting the ability to customize it around what it is you want to do.
Amazing. There's this trend, we've been talking with a few of other guests as well in the co-working space, etc. People now have kind of realized it's just is not as good as it sounds to work from home all the time. And this is less of a practical thing rather than, I think, a psychological or a mental thing. It's about managing the motivation and the dopamine levels and just having that structure within the day and the week. So what are your observations? What's the word on the street that you're hearing with the people that you're working with on that trend? What people want out of what an office space is and what are their needs?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. So I think there are 2 or 3 camps of people, and they don't have the same opinion on this. And I really when we thought about it a lot, as you can imagine, during COVID. So we started in 2019, just before everything really kicked off. I think for those for whom, feel a sense of meaning and purpose from their work, which is derived from, the relationships they have with individuals and a kind of connection to the broader purpose of the company. For those for whom that's important, we generally find that they find space to be more important. In the same way that you probably wouldn't love to go to a wedding on Zoom because you would feel like you would miss out on the kind of the realness of the experience. We find that there's one camp of people who think in that kind of way about work. They don't want this detached to-do list relationship. They want to feel like they are a part of something. And it's the unintentional moments of connection that you get with people is what they really value, as well as the ability to collaborate properly intentionally once they're there. So you've got kind of camp number one. And as you can imagine, we work with those types of companies a lot. You then got another camp of people for whom, remote work has opened up a much more balanced and flexible approach for them. So particularly, I've got 2 young kids myself, and being able to work at home 1 or 2 days, or for many working fully remotely, frees them up to organize their lives in such a way where they can spend more time with their family, where they can spend more time exercising, where really their mental health and their lifestyle is something they can really focus on much more. And then you've got some people for whom they love the routine, and it's like, I really want a separation between home and work, and it really helps me. And really, there's lots of different ways of thinking about this. And in reality, there are people who are staunchly in these camps, but I think all of us are somewhere in the middle, somewhere. And I think what we have found is that when business leaders have been clear on what their strategy to work is and why they back that strategy, i.e., we are in 2 days, 3 days in the week in the office, and we all come in together, and then you can be flexible on the others. If they take a strategy and they're strong and they have a kind of point of view, they've been much, much more successful than those who don't make a decision. And then, it's a bit like an unlimited holiday policy, which was famously unsuccessful, because you say, hey, it's all down to you. You make your choice. You're adults, and we give you the responsibility to decide what you want on holiday. The net result of it was people took less holiday and felt more guilty when they were away. And so providing a boundary as a company helped people enjoy their holidays more. And I really think the same is true of work. I think companies that have an opinion and they're strong on why they want that working pattern have generally, we found, been much more successful in engaging people.
I think there's like a very, very interesting, fascinating human behavioral dynamic here that I have been exposed to when I was first studying sociology and psychology. So I would like to share that here to be part of this conversation, which is when there is a rule, a hard and fast rule. So imagine we are schoolmates, and the school has some rules that apply to all of us. So they create a certain structure in which people kind of are okay with it. It's almost like a glass that we choose to fill. When there is no glass, when there is no structure, then simply it is not a system without structures. It's just a different structure takes its place. In this case, it might be, yes, the company says unlimited holiday days, but then another structure takes its place, which is there's now a social dynamic which people judge each other based on who is hardworking, who is not working, who is slacking off based on the holiday time there is. And I think this kind of dynamic is also in place for the office space. When companies make coming to the office compulsory, mandated for a few days, then it works in a different way than when it is totally optional. So when it is totally optional, it's kind of this weird thing where you go to office, but then you don't have your mates there. Right. So, and then you say to yourself, why did I go to the office? I can just work from home. So it kind of needs to be a necessary evil, or like a power, like a hand of God type of a power that is outside of the social dynamics that kind of shapes how we interact in the office space. So this is what you said made me think, and I wanted to share that. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think this is like the higher level debate that's like kind of raging in different areas, right? It feels like we've got a bit of an argument between, one hand, ultimate choice and complete freedom is the path to fulfillment and happiness. And then you've got this thing on the other one, which is you need boundaries and a framework and a kind of top-down vision or something like this that kind of restricts freedom to then provide more fulfillment. And I think another, as you were saying, that kind of example, another one that came to mind was a study that I read a few years back around fences between properties. And what they found is when properties had fences between them, the neighbors had closer relationships. And when they didn't have fences, they were more upset with each other. And I think it's again, right? Like
a perfect example, actually.
It's like I think a sense of boundaries that are posed but are logical and that people can choose to buy into, I do think have power. And I think there's a risk that we've thrown the baby out with the bathwater a little bit, and it's not going to be to our benefit. Because to your point around, mandated office days, the mechanism that's powerful is you need a critical mass of people in order for the magic of the office to make sense.
Exactly.
And if you say, "Well, come in when you want," people are like, "Well, if I come in and I do the commute and there's no one there, then it wasn't worth it."
Yeah.
And it's a bit, going back to the wedding analogy, it's a bit like saying there's a 5-day wedding. People can choose to come to one of the days they'd like to be at. It's going to be a completely different experience to the ceremony is at 1 p.m. on a Friday, and you get the idea. So I think we are in a little bit of we've had a trend for probably at least 15, 20 years of kind of all about the individual's choice, but I don't think it's necessarily, I think it's gone so far that it's now not really making us happier.
This is a fascinating topic I could speak hours and days about, but I would like to switch gears and jump to another topic, which I think is also fascinating. Your previous experience as in Just Park, and I think although it looks like a different business, which actually it is, of course, but I think there's a common thread there, which is um, our relationship to space and how we populate the space within the city in our daily activities. So I think there's that kind of a familiarity in, I'm guessing, from your aspect. So I would like to hear more about that, as well as how do you think our relationship with the city is changing? And before you answer that question, let me just drop one insight into that conversation, which is this is something that I read about 6 months ago, just after the end of the lockdowns and the pandemics. London's population and the property market actually has seen increased demand compared to the previous months. So compared to the time of COVID, where everybody was going out of the city, so people started coming back to the city. But this time, and I thought this was very interesting, the reason people came to the city was different. It was less about work, but it was more about being part of the city, feeling close to the people, and more social reasons.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. And actually, when we thought about, and I will go back to the direct question you asked about Just Park and how it relates, but I think during the beginning of COVID, we thought long and hard about urbanization because clearly it had a big impact on the bearing of our business. And I think the social side of work is also really important in that the number one place you're likely to meet your life partner, for example, is the workplace. Now, that's clearly not the only reason that people are going to offices, but it is to say that there is social utility both at the workplace, but also the after work events. And, when we were at Just Park, we were friends and we worked together at the same time. And there wasn't this divide maybe that's become more common since COVID. But I think, it's the move back to London surprised me. And I didn't know the rationale. That's super interesting to know. But on Just Park, I think the reason, so I met my co-founder for Kitt at Just Park. So Lucy was there kind of first non-founding employee, and I joined pretty early. We were both captivated by the idea that you could repurpose dormant assets and create a digital experience on top of them that made the customer's life easier. And that's what excited us about the business. And when we became part of the leadership team and started really driving it through to scale, it was, how do we transform a car park under a hotel or a piece of land that is attached to a building and so on into space that can be utilized more efficiently and can ultimately enable people to move around cities more easily. And what we had to build at Just Park, which is the link to Kitt, really was quite a sophisticated platform that handled payment, security, and operations across 50,000 or so different locations from an office in Kentish Town. Yeah. When we thought about Kitt, we felt we had a similar feeling in some respects, which is we think commercial real estate is archaic, it's backwards, it's hard, but it's also really, really important. We want to build a digital experience that makes it easier for the customer. But in order to do so at scale, you're going to have to deliver digital operations and hospitality and security and so on and so forth across a fragmented network of buildings. And that's going to be a combination of hardware, software, and supply chain. And if you can pull those three things together, in the same way that Amazon transformed e-commerce by providing a fulfillment layer and then a marketplace on top, perhaps we could do the same in commercial real estate, which is let's provide a fulfillment layer and then build a marketplace that sits on top of it. That was really the kind of the business model insight for us, really was taken from our experience of doing exactly the same in a different property category.
It's also a very, I would say, a very risky domain, perhaps, given the commercial property market is on the decline.
Well, it's
maybe it's not, but my basic rudimentary understanding of that is there are a lot of issues with long-term leases and so on because of it actually takes up a huge part of the economy as a whole, doesn't it? The commercial property market.
Well, I mean, it's, prior to COVID, it was 3 trillion a year is spent on space and services in the office category.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's a lot. I think what we've observed has been interesting is two things. One is landlords and tenants are now offering and asking for flexibility in a way that's unprecedented, but it was a trend that was already in motion. And what that's meant for us as a business has actually been incredibly positive. We're almost 10 times the size in terms of revenues versus 2 years ago, off the back of larger and larger companies wanting shorter and shorter lease terms. And actually, the value of our fulfillment engine is more and more valuable as the lease terms get shorter. Because if you're a FTSE 100 and you want 100 desk space, we can turn the whole thing around in a couple of months, and it's perfect from day one. It's actually very, very, very hard to self-deliver that, and then to justify all of the work that's required. And so I think larger and larger companies went more and more flexible, but they were still taking space. I think the second part that's interesting is that the amount of space they're taking is lower, but the quality that they're asking for, both from the building but also the service level, has gone up. No. So actually, if you look at rents within London, we are now seeing record rents in every submarket, but they're all being achieved in the top 20% of spaces. And so you have a kind of a two end of the market. You've got people trying to compete on price are in kind of, I would say, crisis mode at this point. And then you've got people who are competing on the quality of the buildings are actually having it pretty good, and they're achieving all sorts of things they weren't able to achieve before. So I think our ethos around this is you need a space that's worth leaving home for.
Exactly. That's an incredible insight. And I think that's just a very clear way of putting it. It needs to be better than the setup that you have at home. And one of the things that happened is because people had to work from home, we have actually improved our working environment at home, right? So the bar is now higher.
Yeah, exactly that. And I think what's cool about that is, I think mediocrity was pretty much the norm in commercial real estate, even when we entered it. But now there's no doubt that if you're a landlord, you thought you were someone who owned an asset, and now you own a business. And I think that's become very apparent to people, and that's why they see their buildings as products in a way they didn't do even 3 or 4 years ago.
Almost a platform, perhaps, yeah.
Oh well, quite. And this is what we're building, right? And I think the other side of it is that if you're going to take a space, you now have much more intentionality as to why you need it. So I think before COVID, it's like, I'm a business, I need a space because people need desks to work on. Whereas now you have a really, really good alternative. The supply of desks is now infinitely larger than it was before COVID, because everyone's got a kitchen table, or hopefully a kind of good setup at home. So actually you shouldn't be, it's not about the desk space, it's about the collaboration areas, it's about the client meeting zones, it's about big breakout spaces where your whole team can have lunch together. Those are the things that people are prioritizing. If I look at the designs we were doing for spaces before COVID versus after, there's far fewer desks and there's far more spaces to meet people.
So what was the first break for the business? I think this is something we don't always hear founders talk about, and I would like to ask yours. There are these make or break points for every business. What was this saying? I don't think it's true, but I think it resonates with most people, which was most startups are 1 or 2 deals away from being a success or a failure, type of a thing. So
yeah, or one or two pivots.
yeah. Or sometimes in some B2B deals as well. So
yeah.
There's always a time when you start the business and you're unsure whether that's going to work, whether it was just a stupid decision to build that business. So you're either a genius or the other end of the spectrum is just sometimes how it feels like to be a founder, unfortunately. And then you get a big affirmation. So what was that first big affirmation for you?
Yeah, sure. Other than raising money before we started, which for us was, it kind of made all of this possible, I would say.
I would say that's kind of the first big break, perhaps, if you raise a decent amount of money.
Yeah, and look, it was super fortuitous. It really was quite, I'd already handed my notice in, so we were committed to doing this and figuring it out. And then, we through an old relationship that got going again, met one of our founding investors, really, for whom they've backed the business at every round pretty much ever since. And that they shared the vision with us of what we were trying to achieve. But I have to tell you, when a week or I think it was 10 days into launching, we realized that we had the wrong product. So we actually initially were a platform for office managers to self-deliver a service experience. And after 10 days of speaking to 55 office managers and realizing quite quickly this wasn't going to work, we said, oh, we're going to have to do what we did at Justfile. We have to transform the end-to-end experience. Like, it has to be a vertically integrated digital experience for the customer that ultimately makes it easier for them. And so within 10 days of starting, we were going back to our founding investor and saying, well, look, we've got the same vision. We want to pivot the product. And he was like, that seemed great. Like, go for it. And I think within 6 months of that, we won one of the world's largest companies as like our sixth deal, who's still with us now. And I sat in the room of that space that was stunning. I was like, wow, A, thank goodness we didn't carry on with the office manager platform thing in the same way. But B, one of the world's largest companies has trusted us with one of their most important spaces. And I'm sat here and they're moving in tomorrow. And I think for me, it was two things. One was, for a company that young to be winning that kind of scale of a client means there is a gap in the market. And B, the product was compelling enough to excite them to turn down all of the other alternatives that at that time were kind of some of the darlings of, WeWork was one of the darlings of the tech world at that point. And they turned all of those kind of guys down. And so that was a really big moment for us. And it felt like we made the right choice to pivot. We paid back the faith the investors paid in us. And then, we had an amazing year off the back of that. We were just winning deal after deal after deal with these much larger customers than we ever imagined working with.
Amazing. Does it change as a founder how you think and how you approach the business, having those kind of big win moments?
Yeah, I would say that. So I used to be a banker consultant type, where the model was, you spend 6 to 8 weeks thinking about a decision and then you think about making it. I think I had to learn to trust my gut a lot more from my first startup experience. But I think, pivoting within 10 days, it was, put it this way, I think the first probably 3 months of the business, every day I was so stressed out of my mind. My co-founder actually loved it because she's like someone who loves solving puzzles. And I was just like, this is so hard. But we have no revenue. We're pivoting our product. Is it going to work? Is it going to work? And there's this kind of ongoing like anxiety narrative. And I think part of it, if I was to think back, how would I want to redo it? It's just kind of realizing that that is the norm and that is normal, which I'd never been told. I didn't realize it was going to be as hard as it was. But B, it's also that kind of nervous energy is the reason you can become a successful founder. And so rather than trying to just chill out and relax, it's kind of how do you harness that energy in a positive way to ultimately drive through important changes. And I think there was that shit at the early stage. You're probably going to make 50 to 60% correct decisions, and you need to make quite a lot of them quite quickly. And it's kind of accepting that you're not going to get things perfect that got us through that initial patch. But I found it a lot harder, kind of emotionally, than my co-founder did.
Thank you for your honesty there. I agree. A lot of founders have that experience. It's more difficult than we sometimes think it would be. How would this journey would be different, would you say, if you had the same intelligence, same skills, same business acumen, but perhaps were a migrant entrepreneur coming to London?
Yeah, great question. It's the question just directed at how would I do it again? That kind of thing. Like, what would I do differently?
In a way, yeah. And also kind of to perhaps almost splice and understand what are the different factors that play in that success, right? There are different types of capital that we rely on.
Got it.
Intelligence and some of it, but some of it is time capital, and it kind of makes a difference at what age you're in because of that time capital thing. There's also the network capital. There's also the capital that comes from being a native speaker and the buddies and the friends you have, and sometimes the work experience, problem solving ability. I think it's important to understand all those dimensions and how they combine together. So that's kind of the purpose of the question.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So look, I think the way in which you understand competition, or how I understand it now, is very different to how I understood it back then. I think when I thought of what I thought was a great idea, and then I saw someone else to whom I thought they were doing it, I was really disappointed. So I was thinking, oh man, I thought I'd come up with something that was going to, be the first mover and all of that good stuff. And we'll probably disregard it and then think, well, I need to find something that hasn't been done before. But looking at it now, I could not take a more opposite view, because I think competition is so good because it proves evidence for demand.
Exactly. That's such an insight, and that's kind of how my thinking around being a founder changed as well. When I see competition, I see, okay, there's market demand. That's good news.
Exactly. And I think, the, none of the biggest names in tech were in their minds probably the first mover. There was always someone else who was proving demand first. And actually, um, even in crowded spaces where it's quite mature, there's always a segment that's underserved. There's always a customer that can be built around differently. And I think for me, it was the things that I would focus more on are try and trying to find a problem where it's such a bad customer experience and the solve would require you to deal with so much complexity that if you were to get it right, it could become enormous and very hard to beat. And so I think by accident, when we kind of our vision for what our business was going to become grew, and we realized we were building a vertically integrated business, we were adding in layers and layers and layers of complexity. But actually, it's meant that we've been able to create an experience that is unique within what would otherwise look like quite a crowded space. And so, I think again, I was I would probably say where there's a bad customer experience, where there is demand, and where there's lots of complexity, is where I think particularly now tons of the opportunities live. So in the days of building a marketplace for X, Y, and Z, there's not many of them left.
I think that's an important point, and there's always a delay, right? What was this idea which kind of resonates with what you said here? Buy the rumors, sell the news type of a thing.
Yeah.
You having a background in finance would appreciate that, I think. But I think that kind of a dynamic is playing out with a lot of startups and so on. So some business model really makes a big noise with the success, and then people hear about it, and then it becomes a norm that it is the go-to strategy or the hot thing in the market until it isn't, but there's always a delay. So a lot of people end up being late. And you think marketplaces are kind of like that, or do you think there are still big opportunities?
I think
If
I
you
definitely think there are still marketplace opportunities, but I think e-commerce created, like, all of a sudden so many new marketplaces were able to be created as the internet became mainstream. And I think marketplaces that succeed now tend to have a kind of a supply side solution that creates the marketplace in some way. And I think the second thing, which I think ties into that point, is the second thing that I learned is in the fundraising process, you're you're going to get all of the no's straight away, and then you'll then get to the yeses at the end. And again, it's as much what you don't want is to try and convince someone who's not excited about what you're building to get excited, because it's never going to happen. And if they did give you the money, you'd have such an odd relationship with them that you wouldn't feel like it was worth it. And actually, the people who we've raised money from, we have a similar mindset. And I think, take Hoxton, for example, who led our last round, and as of yesterday, which we closed another round, they back new categories, and they did Deliveroo, for example, which was a fulfillment enabled marketplace. They backed Babylon, which was a digital GP, and I think that type of mindset, where this is complicated, it requires work on the supply side to get the demand side going. That kind of mindset is again specific to some investors, and we just have to find the right ones.
Because we are running out of time, I do have one more question for you. What's the team like? What is the conversation happening within the company in terms of what type of a place to work Kitt is, and what are your thoughts on it? And with that, are you hiring?
Yeah, I'll go in reverse order. So we are hiring. So we're a team of 65 now. We need to add more people. We're growing quickly and all that good stuff. I think one of the big paradigm shifts for us is me and Lucy are both generalists, and up until maybe 50 or so people, we ran the business of, Lucy, you'll deal with that side, I'll deal with this side, and then we'll check in every week and see how we're getting on. Which, when you're trying to get to product market fit, makes a lot of sense, because you can move super quick. I think we got to post product market fit, and we had a board meeting, and the message from Hoxton and others was, look, we've got product market fit, you have to go and build a world-class organization. And that's not just hiring great leaders, it's also completely reversing the decision-making model. And so for us, as people who've been hands-on, scrapping this business to a point where we can get product market fits, now we have to hand outcomes over to leaders and build a framework that enables them to succeed, and then to empower them and get out of the way a little bit. I think that's a big cultural shift we're going through, which I think is super important. But if I think about what's it like as someone to work at Kitt, I would say the thing that hasn't changed is people generally accelerate their careers and build great relationships with the people they work with. And I think that's not just a nice thing, it's actually important to our strategy, because we haven't tried to automate the whole experience for the customer, because I don't think that's what they want. They need to interact with different types of people at different stages. And where we've had a lot of success, and customers have come to me and said, I did a deal with you guys because I met so-and-so from your team, and they just felt like they were on my side. And I'm like, that deal, could be worth 5, 6, 700K to the business. And they bought because the person they spoke to felt like they were empathetic and they were on it and all these kind of things. So we have to build an environment where people are empathetic, they're on top of things, and they're supported, and they love coming to work. And that actually makes our business better. And so really, we really try to prioritize empowering the best people to develop quicker than they would anywhere else, and to now try to give them outcomes so they can run at it without us getting in the way.
Steve, there are a lot of topics to discuss. Perhaps we'll have you as a guest again in a year and talk about how it's going and get to my other questions. But thank you for spending the time. I do appreciate the genuine responses that you've shared with us.
No, it's been fun. Thanks so much for the time.
Thank you.